In this memo, it's interesting. The IRS has something called statistics of income, and they sort out, and you can see this website, they sort out who does what on their tax returns. It's very fascinating. What bothers me is they did a study of CRTs in 2007, and they did a study in 2012, and they haven't done one since. I really wish they would, because if you look at 2012, there were 113,688 returns for all split interest trust, remainder trust, lead trust, and pooled income funds. And that was down, but it was a down market. And 105,866 were CRTs, of which 91,000 were unit trusts. Corporate stock made up 88% of the assets. Isn't that interesting? Here's another really interesting statistic that you should pay attention to. Trusts under $500,000 made up 72% of all CRTs, and trusts over 3 million were only 3%. Isn't that interesting? I mean, people sometimes think that in the charitable remainder trust market, oh, you deal with millions of dollars. Now, frankly, I work with high net worth, and when you talk to Jane tomorrow, you'll find out that Jane works with even higher net worth. And some of us who've been in the field for a long time, we do deal with high net worth. But look at the average. The average is less than $500,000. So it is and can be a very vibrant market for a lot of the nonprofits. And yet I see a lot of nonprofits shying away from CRTs, thinking it's for the really high net worth, but not necessarily. And then I have a little statistic here. The Conrad Hilton Foundation in 2007, this is the largest one I've ever heard of, said that he sold this Hilton Hotels Corporation and Harrah's Entertainment via a charitable remainder unit trust, the proceeds of which were $1.2 billion. That's a big CRT. I'd like to know who did that. It'd be very interesting. Okay, but here's what I want to go on to. There are some memos that I've written in this course that you're going to have to spend some time reading because we can't go over all the words. But I do want to cover these topics. We covered in motivations so far, people. What are their needs and wants, their hopes, goals, and dreams, fears, and insecurities? And there's one that we didn't cover, and that is sometimes people like control. And we're going to talk when we get to the 4-tier system, the characterization of the income that comes off of a CRT to the recipient, and the filing of the CRT tax return. We're going to talk about donors serving as trustee. And when you see the complexity of the 4-tier system, I think you're going to say, probably you wouldn't suggest that a donor serve as trustee without either a co-trustee who knows what they're doing or a good quality trust administrator, because it is just over their heads. And I have inherited a number of cases where somebody, it's usually when somebody sold a business and that somebody happens to be accustomed to being the boss, maybe is a little bit of a control freak and wants to be trustee. And then they mess it up royally. And sometimes you just can't fix it. So that desire to control is sometimes a problem. But then we didn't cover these other motivations, financial motivations. What leads a person to consider a CRT? Now, this could be with a financial planner or an attorney or you. One is income replacement. And that means, just like we were talking about with the stock, the person no longer wants to manage that asset. Something is going on, like the return isn't great enough, or I say here a multifamily property with the 3 T's, tenants, toilets, and trash. They don't want to deal with it any longer, and they want to replace the income stream they do have with a different income stream. So that should say to you that a CRT is an income generation vehicle. It generates income, and that is the main important factor in using CRTs. There are a lot of people for whom the deduction is really not that important. CPAs tend to think that the deduction is really important, but the donor doesn't necessarily. They want to avoid the capital gain. Or you can find that donors have an asset that doesn't produce income at all, like their residence or raw land or a farm that's not producing very well. They want to convert a non-producing asset to a cash flow asset base. And that's a good motivation. Diversification, like in the case study that we just did, is important. And then retirement income, also in that case study. The deferral of income while the assets are growing in a tax-deferred exempt environment. A net income trust has for years been used earlier with people. For example, what I mean by that is if we look at that Mr. and Mrs. Stock case, and I said, let's assume that they're 65 and 70 and they're planning for their retirement. But what if they were two 60-year-olds or a 55-year-old and a 60-year-old? And they had a stock portfolio that wasn't really generating very much and they wanted to diversify, same facts, and they wanted not to pay the capital gains tax, but they weren't ready to retire. What would they do? Well, they could use either a net income unit trust with makeup and put the stock into that trust, have the trustee diversify, but invest for growth for 10 years or 15 years. Build up that IOU and then sell it and reposition when they want to retire to generate more income. That is a technique for retirement that's been used since I've been in the business, 42 years. So retirement and deferring the income and let the assets grow in the CRT exempt environment, which is no less exempt than an IRA, it's a tax exempt environment, is one very good financial use of a CRT. And then the last one that we have here is three different things: tax deferral, tax avoidance, or exemption. The CRT is, in fact, a federal tax creature. The tax deferral, if the trust sells an asset, as we've said, when you take the property, whatever it is, whether it's real estate or stock or whatever, and put it into the CRT, the act of transferring the title from the individuals to the trustee is not a taxable event for the capital gain. No capital gain happens then. Now, when we get into the four-tier system, you will see that the capital gain is booked in the accounts of the CRT. And it stays there. And some capital gain might come out. Maybe a lot will come out as capital gain. But we'll defer that till tomorrow. But so we have tax deferral, avoidance, and of course, utilizing the exemption of the CRT. Right now, we don't have a lot of issues with a lot of people with estate and gift planning for tax planning because of that 11.58 million of exemption per person. But we will, again, because that sunsets December 31st, 2025. It goes back to what it used to be, plus COLA, cost of living adjustment. So I can't tell you what it's going to go back to, because the cost of living adjustment for the last, I think that came in the beginning of 2018. I can't remember exactly, but the cost of living adjustment will probably in 2026 bring the exemption back down to, you know, 6 or 7 million. So that's one possibility that might happen in estate and gift planning. In 2026, we'll have a different exemption level, estate tax exemption level. We may have more people subject to estate tax, but also a change of administration is a possibility. And if we have a change in administration, it's all the Democrat side has already said that they want to lower that exemption. In addition, with what's happening with COVID-19 and the Relief Act and all the money the government is spending, the government may have to change that law and bring the estate tax exemption down. So lots of things are in flux with estate and gift planning, but right now, just for the moment right now, we don't have to worry because not too many of your donors, a husband or wife, are going to be worth $23 million. Because 23 million is what 23 point something, 16 I think, is what they have as an exemption. Now, we've gone through this before, the ideal formula, and what we haven't talked about is the philanthropic motivation. And that is, while we talk a lot about the charitable remainder trust and all of its features, we're talking from the donor perspective. You sit on the other side, you already know philanthropic motivations, but I want to say something. What does the word development mean? That means you develop their intent to be philanthropic. I've worked with quite a number of people on charitable remainder trust who started out having zero philanthropic intent. They had those financial motivations. They wanted to avoid all those taxes, but in order to do so, they had to develop philanthropic motivation. Whose job is that? Well, that's yours. In my situation, because I work in philanthropic planning, even though not specifically for an organization, I work with several, but I have to develop that philanthropic motivation and I have to get them to understand what that means. So you've got to look at two sides. There's donor motivation and there's organization donee motivation. And you know that, and you develop that, but they don't have to come into you with what I call a philanthropic motivation in their back pocket. You can create it.